Hello everybody and welcome to part 9 of my Fire Emblem 6 hard mode guide. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 8X. This is the first chapter, which is going to screw up my parts being equal to chapters, but that's okay. This is the first gaiden chapter that we're going to have available in the game. Now this chapter, along with honestly most gaiden chapters, are pretty straightforward and boring. I always think of the last chapter and this one being sort of boring after how sort of entertaining and difficult chapter 7 is. But nevertheless, it is a chapter, so we'll be discussing it, although I will probably be skipping most of it. Mostly what I want to talk about here is what the gaiden chapters are and how they work. So, in this game, to get the S rank weapons, you have to get to gaiden chapters, and there's always a stipulation to get there. So for example, the first one, this one is quite easy. All you need to do is keep Lena alive, which isn't particularly difficult. Some of the later ones will require specific characters to be alive, or like clearing chapters in a requisite amount of turns. And then you use those divine weapons not only to fight, they're useful, but also if you want to get past the Zephyl chapter to the actual endgame, you need all the divine weapons in your possession and still around. So you can't use them up or have a character die with them equipped. So basically this game technically ends in chapter, I don't know what chapter it is, 20-ish, where you defeat Zephyl. But if you have all the divine weapons, you get to go beyond that and do kind of 3 additional chapters, more or less 2. The gaiden chapters themselves are all pretty boring, and they're all probably my least favorite chapters in the entire game. They all have a little gimmick. This one is these little fire tiles looking things here, which will randomly hit units on them for 10 damage. It isn't guaranteed, but it potentially can. Obviously, you can avoid the fire tiles. It's not particularly difficult. As far as the actual chapter is concerned, again, there's not a ton to talk about. Some of these units move, some of them don't. For the most part, this is just a really good opportunity to train your units. I know down here is a little bit hairy. There's like a Killing Edge guy. This guy's got an Armor Slayer, Steel Bow, and then Elfire. These 3 do not move, but you can kind of play around with who moves and who doesn't. So yeah, now that I've explained the gaiden chapters, again, I'm going to skip most of this chapter. The boss is kind of interesting and actually fairly difficult, so we're going to talk about him when we get there. But honestly, as I said, there's just not much to talk about when it comes to basically most of this chapter. So I'm going to basically skip it all, and then we'll talk about the boss when I get there. Alright, so at this stage, as I said, we've cleared out all the units. Like I said, I didn't want to talk too much about this chapter, because most of the units, I think at this point you can probably figure out how to fight. But now we're on to the boss, and I did want to talk about the boss, Henning, because as you can see, his stats are actually quite high. I mentioned in the previous chapter that we were going to be fighting our first promoted enemy, and Henning is the first of a couple of hero bosses that have a lot of speed, and hit rates are not good in this game. He has 30 extra avoid because of the throne, along with 3 defense. Now, he does get weighed down by 4 and 2 respectively by his weapons. Thankfully, he has crappy weapons. But yeah, as you can see, his 18 speed is quite high. His 13 defense means dealing damage to him is actually quite difficult as well. So at this stage, finding a unit that can actually do this is sort of annoying. You can have promoted Rucker at this point. As you can see, our Rucker unfortunately does potentially get crit, but also has some crit, so that could be a decent option. Even with our Lance being pretty darn strong, he looks okay doing this, but not particularly strong. Our Lu can take a hit and doesn't get doubled, so we can potentially lean on him for this. But yeah, as you can see, we don't have great options here. At this stage, both Marcus and Zealot are also not going to look particularly good. And again, this is with like our Lance and Allen being pretty darn strong. Like, these are not screwed Lance and Allens by any means. So just be aware this boss is pretty tough. Now, I wouldn't be too worried about it. As you can see, the damage output that he's doing, especially with our healers, is just not high enough to really matter. I would never worry too much about bosses unless you're trying to finish chapters quickly, because then you're going to want to plan for them. But this isn't like, you're never really going to get stuck on bosses. There's no boss, even like Gel, who's kind of a famously like annoying boss, you're never really going to get stuck on. Some of the older games, this isn't necessarily true. I had a Thracia run once where my Asbel died in a certain chapter and I just literally couldn't kill the boss. There was just no way. But this isn't Thracia. It's not going to happen. So yeah, I'll kind of see what works for me here. But like I said, I mean, you can really just use Lance or whatever you want to use. But just be aware that he is kind of a pain to deal with and a pretty tough boss. Okay, so at this point we've whittled them down a decent amount with both Lance and Lou. I will say as well that the experience that you get, even just for hitting a boss like this, is actually pretty high. Like I think Lance and Lou are both getting more experience just for like connecting on the boss than they were for fighting normal enemies. So it's not bad actually experience. I think we're going to be giving the level to Lou because I'd really like to promote Lou, and Lance is going to be really nice in the next couple of chapters. Well, not if he misses. All right, now we'll see if Lance can do it. There's a lot of this, and this is a lot of Fire Emblem 6, honestly. This is why killing bosses quickly... This is actually one of the biggest reasons that as we go forward, Rucker is going to be as useful as he is. Because finding consistent boss kills... Okay, well, this is a really good example of Fire Emblem 6. But finding consistent boss kills is actually not the most consistent thing in the world. And there's going to be some chapters later where having that consistent boss killer is extremely nice. I could potentially have him killing Henning. As I said, at this point, we really want to be promoting a lot of different units, like Lou, Rucker, and Lance, or Alan, depending on your situation, are all going to want to be promoted pretty quickly after this. So who's getting this kill is kind of up to you. I think Lou getting to a stage is probably the most useful thing, but they're all pretty nice. And yeah, you can see the fire that I mentioned earlier. It's probably not going to really matter too much for you. With an extra heal for Saul, and then we will be on our way. So, yeah, like I said, this is a pretty straightforward chapter. In the next part, we're going to be getting to the Western Isles, which I would say is one of the easier parts of the game. We're also going to be getting the S-Rank Sword, which is also kind of nice, because Rucker can actually get to be able to use that pretty early, and it can be fairly nice. So, yeah, next time, as I said, we're going to be getting into the Isles. These are going to be getting at least a little bit more interesting. So I will see you next time.